Okay, we are going to start meeting in 2 minutes. Okay.
We need to resolve that.
No. I think my point a lot more. It's written so quickly. It's easier to understand what actually changes. Yeah. I noticed that it's short, so I can because I feel it's very short. So one thing we need, I know a lot of this reading is people that's just actually ahead. It's your own. In a mirror was, one, and everyone else decided different one. Yeah.
Right next to the most right next to the most important meeting resource.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, you know the official name. The University College.
Okay, let's start. Today we have a tight schedule, so let's start quickly. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, this is TCPM working group meeting. Please make sure you are in the right room. My name is Yoshi Nishida, and unfortunately, Michael Schaff and Mike Tuxon couldn't come to this meeting, but I believe they will join the meeting from remote, although Germany time is 3 a.m. right now. Okay. And this is user note well. This is just a reminder of IETF policy with regard to your behavior, your privacy, your intellectual property, your copyright, and so on. So if you have any concerns about this one, please read this carefully. And you can find same content on the IETF webpage. And not logistics. And I really appreciate Martin, volunteer note taker, and Mahesh taking up Jabber. And just simple reminder, when you speak about the mic, please say your name before you start making a comment so that note taker can track your name. Okay, so to present surprise, we have lots of agenda today. And so first, working group chairs update the status of the working group. And after that, we have discussion about 2 working group items. First one is RTO consider. And Corey, as a reviewer, present some feedback of this RTO consider draft so that we can think about if the draft is ready for working group last call or not. And next one is accurate ECN plus ECN plus discussion. And in this one, we also chairs think this is close to the working group last call. But beforehand, we would like to check, there are, any technical aspect remaining issue, or if there is any procedural issues. So because of that, we have several presentations. First, Marcelo will talk about update for ECN++. And then after that, Bob, I didn't get really slide yet, but if you want to speak up, you can speak up something about accurate ECN. It's your choice.
I wasn't sure what it said process in the title, and I haven't got any slides about process, but I've got some slides.
If you have any technical, but I don't want to talk about non-technical stuff.
Okay. So shall I mean,
If you can skip, okay, that's fine.
Prepare a slide. I would just sorry, I'd have to quickly prepare a slide, but I wouldn't be able to do it in time for that slot. But
it's a little tricky to show the slide.
Maybe I'll just come to the mic and try and explain it.
Okay, that's enough.
Okay. I might try one slide.
Okay. And after that, Milia will talk about registration policy for TCP header. So this is related to accurate ECN discussion. And then after that, we will discuss about procedural discussion for accurate ECN and ECN++. The meaning of procedural discussion is not focusing on technical style, just focus on how to proceed this draft. So that's the meaning of this discussion. And after that, we have 4 presentations for non-working group items. First one is high start. Praveen will talk about it. And after that, Mafish talk about young model for TCP configuration. And after that, Kares talk about TCP ACPU. And then after that, Rod will talk about some congestion experiments. So that's today's agenda. Any comment, questions, suggestion about this agenda? Okay, moving on. So now let's talk about working group status. So unfortunately, we haven't published any RFCs since Montreal, but we have lots of working group items that's close to publication. Let's take a look. TCPM converter draft, we have completed working group last call, and then we have submitted to IESG. And 793 base draft, this draft has been continuously updated. And then current plan, according to the authors, current plan to update is reflects the Med's review and the Michael's review. And then also we have 2 reviewers, Gori and Praveen. And after we got all reviews, we think, and if it looks okay, we are thinking about initiating working group last call. So our current plan is initiating working group last call early 2020, if possible. And that's a plan. So we expect reviewers to submit their reviews earliest is possible. That would be great. I appreciate your support. And 2140 base draft, this draft recently updated 3 days ago, and it's adds a new appendix for automating the initial window increase. And then after this, basically in this version, the authors think this draft is almost ready for working group last call. They don't have any specific plan to update anymore. So if you are interested, please read this draft and then please submit your comment to the mailing list. Okay. And next one is RAC. And we have been discussing this draft for a long time. And then the chairs think this draft is close to working group last call, but we are right now checking the final thing. And then one of the things we are checking is if the intended status of this draft should be PS or should be experimental. And we are getting a data point on the mailing list, but at the same time, we would like to get data point in this room. So I think people already familiar with FAT is back. So if you think RAC draft should be published as proposed standard, please raise your hand. Okay, it's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Thank you. And if you think RAC draft should be published as experimental draft, please raise your hand. Okay, 0. Okay.
Gauri, we just got done. Go sit.
I wondered if the chairs, Gauri Fairhurst, I just wondered if the chairs wanted to say why it was PS rather than EXP, because we all seem to agree it is PS.
Oh, okay. So I think there are very solid definition of the PS and the experimental in my understanding. But so basically, RAC has many implementations, and it's widely
That might be enough.
And also, we don't know clear vision what to experiment with RAC. Yeah.
Praveen, I had one brief comment on working group last call. I do think the draft is complete, but I gave the feedback to the authors that it's currently not that readable. It needs an editorial pass to make it easy to consume. Right now, it's too verbose and too complicated. So that's the only thing that's remaining, I think. But we should go to the working group last call. It's just an editorial comment.
Okay, just editorial. Okay.
So this is Chris Lemons on Jabber saying, point of order, is this sort of thing often best done as a hum instead of a direct vote? And by the way, this is Mahesh Yetanandani, and I would add +1 to that.
Okay. That's okay. Anyway, I think this, I just would like to get data point and the final decision made on the mailing list. We will make our announcement very soon on the mailing list. Okay, next one is RTO consider. Okay, and then RTO consider. I think the chair think this draft is very close to working group last call, so we have allocated some slot, and then Gauri, will provide his feedback as assigned reviewers. And then next one is accurate ECN and then generalized ECN. And recently we have many discussion on these two drafts, and the chair think these two drafts is also close to the working group last call, but at the same time, the chair think we need to check several points before we move on to the working group last call. That's why we allocate some time to discuss this one. So basically, the purpose of the discussion today is if there is any remaining technical points issue before we go into working group last call. And then next point is what's the best way to proceed this draft. So we will have a discuss later. Okay, that's about it. Any comments about chair slide or chair something? Okay, so moving on to the presentation. Okay, Gauri, it's your turn. Yeah.
Hi, Gauri Fairhurst. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the RTO Consider draft. This is just my own review. The purpose of the slides is to make a pronouncement on this. It's just to try and illustrate what we might want to comment on as we go to a working group last call, and hopefully it helps other people think and conclude on this piece of work. Let's see if I can remember what my slides say.
And then you have the
Okay, so yep, that's just me. So I had a bit of context in reading this, which might be useful. Mark's been doing doing this document for a long time. He started off just doing it, and then it got more and more concrete. Right at the time we did our RFC 8085, which is now a little while ago, Mark commented on 8085, and we included some of the advice from this into RFC 8085, just the UDP advice. I've written a document as an individual, and I read a whole lot of documents, and I came to my own conclusion. Then I went back to look at the RFC series to see what it said. I've now gone back and looked at this document to see whether it says the same thing. And the final point is, this is my context. The other thing is this represents BCP status. It was originally a TCP-oriented document. It now is a little bit wider in scope, but it comes from TCPM, so it gives the TCP background. So, good news. I read it again. It is readable. You know, in my opinion, it's readable, so anyone else can read it. It seems correct to me. Maybe there's bits to wiggle in, maybe there's bits to discuss, but the general thrust is definitely in the right direction. In one or two places, it says vague things. I'll come to those in a second. I don't know better ways to do these, but it is BCP, so we should see whether the BCP is actually something we can check when somebody compares with this. And it mostly comes to the same conclusion as in CC guidelines, so independently came to the same thing. Biggest question, and I think I know the answer, but it's not entirely clear. But that's quite small, sorry. Does it intend to update the existing RFCs that have been published? The words kind of suggest it doesn't, and then some of the details kind of suggest it might let you relax implementations that exist of protocols beyond what is specified in the RFCs. This makes me a bit unsure about what it's doing, and if it will, yeah, it's a question. So comment one's a question.
Yeah, we can clarify with Mark, right?
Yeah, and it might have a big impact on how the working group sees that. If we, otherwise you have to do an updates against other RFCs. So we should check that first and then get feedback. So this is a general question on the whole thing. It's the most difficult question, so it's comment one. Here's ones I don't think we can easily get out of, but Mark uses the word, in steady state, the RTO should be based on recent observations. And he doesn't give any idea about how to quantify recent. So that's probably okay, but we could say it was, we could explain what recent was if we knew. If people have opinions on this, we can make the text better. Otherwise, it's kind of not that useful as should to evaluate. And similarly in the same thing, timestamp measurements should be taken regularly. And then it says the notion of regularly should be defined as at least once per RTT. I think in this case, Mark's done exactly what I hoped to do in comment 2, but the text is mangled and it should be more like the blue text below. In other words, combine the two together and just say it should be taken at least once per RTT and you're done. So do you have thoughts, Michael, on that one? On number 2, I think, or number 3, either way. Go. If you can read it.
Okay, Michael. Michael Wetzel. I do have a comment on number 2. You brought up the definition of recent.
Yes.
I think given that the point of this document is to try and be a bit more vague in how we, to create a bit more wiggle room.
Yes.
I think we should make an effort to not try and define recent and leave it up to implementers and see if that passes as such.
Okay, so I recommend we get rid of the should, because what's the point in relaxing it and then having a should? So
but that's a way of updating. But isn't that a way of updating the spec? I mean, if you have a spec that says, I mean, if a previous spec has a capital should in it, and then this one is trying to relax the other one with but not with a capital should, then what? Then this has no meaning, right?
I think
so. You want to probably overrule the previous one with a more relaxed definition, so that in that way, I think there should be a capital should, but still it should be left vaguish, if that's possible. That's a question.
I was kind
but,
of
I mean,
suggesting
that's the intention, right?
Not a good idea.
Okay.
You just say may do whatever it likes and can take or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
should without a boundary is not really something that's measurable. Should without a boundary, should being recent is not really a bound, because there's no way I can look at that and compare it with anything else.
Okay.
So, okay, this is me kind of doing a review to try and create some discussion here so we can go to working group last call, not me pronouncing.
Jana Iyengar.
Yeah.
I agree that it would be nice to have a little more crisper definition of recent. In general, I don't see a reason why a BCP can't say should. I think I'm hoping we're not saying that is okay.
I like my own rewritten blue text here, which says should and sets kind of some scope.
Sure.
Or some example of what the should means. Okay, that was what Jana said. Okay, that's fine. I think probably these two can be read a bit more. And we can probably get consensus, I would imagine. There's some nits on choice of words, which really are nits. And what about CC guidelines? You asked me about this. This is currently individual. It may go forward. It wasn't adopted this IETF, and it tries to set a much bigger box on another group of stuff. I would like to suggest this is an unrelated document, and it does not have any impact on publishing this here. It will inevitably refer back to this if that goes ahead. Mira.
Mia Kulun, I think you did a very great working group last call review here. Let's just do the working group last call and get like one or two more of these reviews and get the document out the door. I don't think we need those. I mean, like, great that you did it, right? But I don't think we need those reviews before working group last call in order to get ready to working group last call. This is like something you do in working group last call.
I was asked to do a review, and I bubbled up this stuff. These slides are now available. Go read it yourself and work out
I
what
think
to do.
your review shows we should really go for working group last call.
Yeah. So the reason why we ask reviewer is, beforehand we didn't get much feedback on this draft. That's why we assigned the reviewers. Yeah, right now it's done. Corey, one question. So these are little minor comments from my point of view. It's not a major issue. So that's after. So you're basically okay with.
Sorry, I'll answer your question.
Yeah. So you basically okay with proceeding the working group last call, as long as we can sort it out minor issue.
Yeah, my comments for working group last call will be these comments if the text remains like this. Apart from the first one, there are none of these comments which are which would block a working group last call. The first one should be clarified, I think, by the chairs, so that the intent of the document is clear. Does it update other RFCs or does it not? Because that is an important thing to get right. Yeah, so you asked me, it's readable, and I have comments. There's one big question, and it will be ready for working group last call. Does not conflict with anything else I know of.
Okay, thanks for the feedback. And Jana, as another reviewer, what do you think?
I'll first apologize for not having done the review sooner, and I'm writing up some things right now, but I've read through the draft carefully, and I think it's well written, except there is one major question. It's a clarification point or a question of scope, really, of the document. So the document isn't TCPM. It says that the let me pull the text. I was just about to pull the text. The draft says in section 3, the principles we outline in this document are protocol agnostic and widely applicable. So that's point 1. However, the draft continues to say that the requirements in this document only apply to cases where loss detected via a timer is repaired by a retransmission of the original data. And there are other ways of doing recovery, but this document doesn't consider those transports. Effectively, the document precludes QUIC, because QUIC does not actually require you to retransmit. It only requires you to detect loss. Now, I think there's a very simple way to fix this, which is to remove the requirement for retransmission protocols that only do retransmissions from the draft. I don't think it changes the thrust of the draft. I think it's perfectly fine without that. I'll apologize to Mark for bringing this up this late. I'm grateful that he's not on the call. Because when he yells at his computer later on, I won't be there to hear it. But I'm happy to write this up now.
Great.
And send it. But this is the question, I suppose. Do we want to say this is for TCP, or do we want to say this is broader for other protocols and include Quick in it explicitly, or it's somewhere in the middle right now, which is maybe all right. I don't want to have to go change the whole thing. It's still useful as it is. I don't want to make this go through a whole other process again.
That's okay. Please send your review on the mailing list. And then
I'll do
Mark
that.
told me that he will check the mailing list.
Praveen, I had a clarification question actually for Jana. So when you say Quick doesn't do retransmission, we're still with reliable delivery. You will end up retransmitting the payload at some point if it's not the packet, right? So, I mean, any reliable transport in this probably applies to. Maybe in certain ways, but not others.
I think that's true. But really, what I care about is loss detection, ultimately. The RTO is about detection, not about actually the retransmission of the data after that. So I think I'm trying to say that if the scope of the document is limited to detection, it applies much more broadly than it does right now.
Gori, first, at the beginning I said RFC 8285 applies to UDP-based transports. That applies to Quick. This aligns, I think, with that because Mark provided input to that. So I think this is probably just a circular dependency as far as I can see. As in, you asked, does this apply to Quick? Because this says no, only retransmission protocols. RFC 8285 does apply to Quick and has the same guidance in. So no? On that one, okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is specific text that's in the document that explicitly goes ahead and precludes, which is why it's strong about it. It doesn't need to be, and it's an easy fix. I think it can be fixed easily.
Yeah, cool. So if it actually was not intended to say that, like if they actually wanted to talk about loss detection and not about retransmission, it's unnecessary, right? But like I also don't have any problem with it because we have the experience with TCP. It's a BCP for TCP, which is very applicable to TCP, and you can of course use it for other protocols if it makes sense to you, but it's like not binding in that sense for other protocols, which is also fine. It's still guidance, right?
Sure, but you don't need to say
that. Yeah. If it's really just like if they didn't intend, or like if we didn't intend to say it, we should remove it.
I don't think it's
Marco, one thing that is very important is that always, even though it's loss detection means that we quite likely retransmit, and retransmissions are always, they have to do with the congestion control. So whenever you play with the timers, that's related to congestion control. That's also very clearly said also in the congestion control principles. Please read that. And to add to that is, and the area, especially when we only have a few packets to send, and we are then everything is related to retransmission timers, then it's a very delicate area because then when you have a lot of load, that is the area where the congestion collapse also happens.
Yeah.
If you are transmitting too much unnecessary retransmissions, especially.
If you want to have a suggestion of RTO constant, you can send it to the mailing list, and then also will respond to you. Okay. So, any more comments? Then we will move on to the next one. Marcelo?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcelo Bañulo, and I'm here to give a brief update on the ECN++ generalized ECN draft. So this is a short recap. So the ECN++ draft, the purpose is to enable ECN marking in TCP control packets that was precluded in the original specification. This table will show the difference between the original 3168 ECN specification and our proposed draft. Basically, the original specification didn't enable the marking of any control packets. In the draft, we allow this in two different scenarios. In case where ACCN has been negotiated or is being negotiated, in the case that ACCN is not being negotiated. So for most of packets, it's the same thing. You can mark them, except for a couple of cases where you can only mark them as long as, you have are trying to negotiate ACCN. We have had a very thorough review from Michael in the last, over the last couple of months. We changed quite a few things. I would say that most of them were like clarifications, rewording, justifications, rearrangements, but essentially were like mostly editorial and not only editorial, but clarifications and this type of things, right? To improve readability and this type of things. And there is one main change that we have done based on Michael's comments, that is the following, right? In the previous version of the draft, the only situation that you can actually mark the SYN packet as ECT was if we are also trying to negotiate ACCN, right? The reason for that is because ACCN enables the server, the one receiving the SYN mark with ACCN, to feed back the congestion signal in case the SYN was CE marked, right? The current 3168 ECN, server supporting this spec doesn't have the means to provide that feedback, right? So we had long discussions before about this, and the decision was that unless you're able to feed back the congestion signal back to the client, you should not be able to mark the SYN, right? And that's why we only enable the marking of the SYN if you were negotiating ACCN. Michael's suggestion was he still wanted to allow the marking of the SYN in cases where you were not negotiating ACCN, and he proposed that you do that as long as you keep the initial window to 1, right? You react as if you have received a congestion signal, even though you will not receive anything because there's no way for you to get the signal back, right? So we thought that this was okay. It doesn't break anything. You're putting yourself in the worst case. However, the performance of this will probably be worse than you have a performance penalty because of doing this. Yes.
Marco, clarifying question. So you are assuming that the accurate ECN is the only way to provide feedback?
Right. Good question. Good question. So as current, what we are stating in the draft is you can mark this if you have some way to get the feedback back, either ACCN or any other mechanism that will be defined in the future, because as far as I know, currently there is no other standard that actually allows that.
Yeah, that's my point. Important to not to tie it only to the accurate ECN, but any other mechanism.
Correct. That words are in there. Yes. And you can also mark it as long as if you don't have a way to get the feedback back, you use initial window of 1, right? Basically react as if you had congestion. Yes, Mia
Kulevin. I just realized you can even generalize this a little bit more, because what we usually, the advice we give to UDP traffic that is not congestion control is you cannot send more than 1 packet per round trip time. So if you keep your window forever at 1, I don't know why you would do that with TCP, but maybe there's a case, you can actually mark all your packets, also your X, with ECT capable. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Good. Makes sense.
But if you don't respond to congestion, isn't it 1 every 3 seconds or something? Because you're not congestion responsive. It's 1 per RTT if you're without feedback.
What we say, you're the author. But I read it
Yeah,
very
but
often.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Excellent. Yeah. There's a first safety level, which is once per RTT, and the second one of something that doesn't actually respond, which is once every 3 seconds. But this is probably the first case.
No, the difference is if you know the RTT, it's 1 per RTT. If you don't know the RTT, it's once every 3 seconds.
Thank you for reading it more.
I have a suggestion. Given that ECE is meant to be a sticky bit, could it be possible to keep the initial window to 1 MSS until the first ACK indicating that, which can indicate that no CE mark was received, and then the initial window can, normal initial window can be applied.
That sounds
basically the ECE bit is supposed to be sticky.
Yes.
So it could, after the initial handshake, record also the CE code points that occurred during the handshake.
So, Bob.
So you would only need to temporarily limit the initial window to 1.
Bob. I don't want to argue about this with you later, so.
So, I was just thinking about taking advantage of the fact that ECE is sticky in standard ROC 3168, so that it could record the state of CE during the handshake, even though it won't be visible until after the handshake. So for the first RTT, it might be necessary to limit the initial window to 1, but subsequently it could be increased once it is confirmed that no CE mark occurred during the handshake.
No,
the point is ECE comes back valid after the handshake, and at that point you get the information.
What do you mean ECE comes back valid after the handshake? The 3 bits are used in the handshake to say what the bits mean, and so there is no point where ECE means ECE if accurate ECN is being negotiated.
This is for the case. This is for the 3168 case, the classic ECN case.
Okay, so say that all again then, because I was in completely the other case. Yeah.
Right. So in 3168, ECE bit is sticky.
Yep.
So we can have it be sticky also during the handshake phase, although it is set during the handshake anyway. So you can only tell whether it was set by a CE mark during the handshake after the handshake has completed.
Yeah, yeah.
So at that point, you can find out whether a CE mark occurred during the handshake and restore the initial window to the normal value after.
But how can you tell that it occurred during the handshake? Because you've had it, because it was sticky, it won't. What's the difference between the 2 cases that tells you whether there's?
But I mean,
how do you know?
Because it's clear.
Oh, because it's sticky. Right. Assuming you've got some other packets in the round trip time.
Okay, but unfortunately, that's not exactly how it's usually implemented. Because in a lot of cases, it would just disable ECN if you see a CE in the SYN and not give you any feedback anymore. Yeah, that's what Linux does. It shouldn't, but that's what's implemented.
Well, we've already told them it shouldn't, and we've already told them that it shouldn't, and Eric says, well, RFC 3168 says it should, and it's not a bug, and he won't move. So.
Rod Grimes, I think that even though there's an implementation that is potentially wrong or right, if we can clarify here, I think we should try and clarify to clear up that situation, that not doing so is on us and not on the Linux people. That if
that would be very, very useful, because on measurements, 84% of servers in the world do this behavior where they turn off ECN if there's CE on the SYN.
Okay, so just to understand this. So the situation. So if I understand this, I don't know what your name is. Sorry. Sorry. Jonathan. So as far as I understand, Jonathan's suggestion seems acceptable, seems reasonable, right? The problem is that there are implementations that will behave in a undesired way if we took that approach. So the question is whether we should want to acknowledge the existence implementations and try to avoid having a problem with them, or do this that seems to work, unless except for the fact that 80% of the servers seems to take it in the wrong way. So.
Does the bad behavior only occur on CE mark or also for ECT?
Media do the measurements, so.
Yeah. Let me wake up first. So actually, it's not a problem, because like if that occurs, you won't negotiate ECN with the server, right? And then you're in the state where you're just not like ECN capable, and you shouldn't set any ECN flags. So if you negotiate ECN with the server, then you're right. If you don't get feedback,
right,
then you should be able to then you should know that there was no marking, and you can probably increase your window again. But I think we should double check how this is implemented, if it's actually implemented as sticky or not. I mean, it should be, but I'm not sure how it's implemented. That's the one part. So like if it's actually implemented as sticky, we can do that. The other part is that if you set the CE mark, if you set ECN capable and the CE mark might set, it's usually just the CE mark where they fall back. There are a few implementations who also fall back on the ETC. And I think isn't that even mentioned in the draft that this behavior exists?
Yes.
So like maybe we should also put a warning here in addition on where we talk about like these cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially looks like we need to verify a few things, but we're going forward with Jonathan's suggestion. Correct? Okay. Excellent.
Okay.
I don't know if I don't think I have anything else. Yeah.
Okay.
So next steps. What do we do?
We will discuss later.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next, Bob, you want to say something about accurate ECN while you are fine? Okay, you need 5 minutes or something? Then, okay. Or you can directly connect HDMI cable to your laptop.
I've sent them to the list. Okay.
But you can connect. So you. Yeah. I can swap agenda with Meteor. Okay. Bob, you can send slide to me. And
Marcelo, can I ask you something more?
Okay.
Is the draft currently saying even if you don't negotiate classic ECN, you can set ECT in the SYN if you have a congestion window of 1, or you have to at least negotiate classic ECN?
I don't know what it says, but it should be saying that You can only set it up if you're negotiating classic ECN. That's what I thought it should say. I don't know if that's what I wrote, but
Okay, while Bob is preparing slide, Media will talk about registration policy for TCP header flags. And this is remote.
Good morning. Okay, so I just submitted on Monday a very short draft to make a proposal. And it's one of these very exciting topics where we talk about registration policies. So what we have right now is that we have RC 2780, and I can look over here, that's easier. 2780 that specifies the registration policy for the TCP header flags as standards action. And we have 3168, which actually forms a registry for these flags. So firstly, there was a registration action, but no registry. Then we had a registry. Then after that, we had an experimental RFC that assigned bit number 7, which is not really what the registration policy said. I don't know how that happened, was before my time. And then recently we decided that we move 3540 to historic and also change the entry in the registry and put it to reserved. So that was RC 8311. You can still follow me with all the RC numbers Friday morning. Yeah. I'm losing track here. 8311 doesn't make any recommendations what to do about how we can use bit number 7. Again, it says it's open for experimentation, but what do we do about the registration in the registry? So we now want to use it again for accurate ECN, and we are not sure what to do here. So what I'm proposing here is actually to change the registration policy to experimental, because what it depends on how we apply use of experimental and proposed standard in this working group. But to my feeling, whatever we want to do with those bits, we will publish an experimental RFC first. And similar as we are in the situation with accurate ACN right now, we really want to make using the bit part of the experiment usually. So how can we ever use the bit if we want to have an experiment, but then we have standards action registry? So the end of this thought process would be that we use the bit for an experiment. We don't put it in the registry, which also doesn't make sense because we have a registry to actually announce that it's used. So that's why I would like to change the registration policy here. Of course, we have to be very careful. Of course, we need strong agreement that we really want to do that. But as proposed standards, all experimental RFCs goes basically through the same process. Usually they also have IETF consensus, but I think it's actually more important that this group in this room has consensus about it. And we should really make sure that also the experiments talk about what happens if the experiment fails, how you can change anything that is under experimentation, these kind of things. So it has to be carefully discussed in every experimental RFC, but I think we in this group can make sure that this happens. Do you want me to show the next slide?
Is there a next slide?
Okay, so this is one proposal. There are other proposals. We could only apply this to the accurate ECN bit because that was already messed up, or the nonce bit, actually, the reserved bit, because that was already messed up. And there's also a chance for temporary assignment, but it doesn't really say exactly what a temporary assignment is and what it means. Or we can just not assign it and go on with the experiment or whatever. Or we could change accurate ECN to proposed standard and not change the registry and care about this later on when we try to use the next bit.
Right. Just one thing. Before this presentation, Chair will organize discussion about how to proceed accurate ECN and the ECN++ draft. So that's not, if your comment is directed to this proposal, please make a comment. But if you, right now, I don't want to talk about which one.
Yeah. Good. I actually do have a comment about this proposal. Yeah. Actually, can you go to the next slide? No. I don't know, but no, because it's not defined, and hell no. So I would submit that basically any use of these flags is going to be in its initial deployment phase, which is from 2020 to 2029, experimental de facto. So I think that the document, or the documentation about this registry should actually reflect the reality, and that's what this does. So do it. I'll notice that we did so you and I actually did a very small experiment last year that compared in a small slice of the network the deployability of these actual flags without a registration to experimental TCP options, and this came up favorably. Like there was no, like the difficulty of deployment was the same. So given that, I think we even have data that says that, yes, this is experimental, and make the documents reflect reality. So adopt, publish, last call, we're done.
So to repeat the good news, like what we actually found is that using the bits is easier than using a new TCP option, right? It's bad for TCP options. But like, yes, we can still use them.
So, Gori Fairhurst, I think you've applied the slow start method to writing internet drafts. Yes, I like the idea of doing this. No, I don't like your draft, and no, I don't like the choice of keywords in your draft, and no, I don't like the spelling mistakes and other stuff. So thank you for making a draft quickly. But then I think we need to kind of get the detail right, because there's a couple of things that kind of really go oddly. One is the should at the one up here, like should discuss the scope of the experiment and potential failure causes of something that kind of might last for a long time. Why don't we say must discuss? I mean, must describe or must have this bit in the document that goes ahead, because then we say it's got to be there, and we can look at it, and then we can make the decision and then move on, rather than should, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, this is fluffy anyway, right?
Okay.
Like, you should write something in your draft. So.
Well, obviously, you.
Or you must write. I mean, you must use word in your drafts, right?
Yeah, right. Must use the right word. Okay,
the
right.
word experiment must appear in your draft.
Yeah, and if we do the experimental thing, then I think we really should put it in the registry, because this could last for a long time, and we should just be in there documented in the way you say. I like that part, and I think we get the details right here.
Yeah. Do you want to co-author? Or you want to write your own draft, and I just like.
I don't want to write my own draft. No, no. I like your idea of just throwing something out there and going. I'll happily help if that helps. Yeah.
David Black, author of 8311. Yes, do this. At the time the 8311 was done, I already had more than enough stuff I was coping with in that draft, and did not. I don't think this registry policy was ever mentioned. Had it mentioned at the time, I would have gently declined to have taken it on, considering that I already had more than enough scope creep adventures on 8311.
Yeah.
Rod Grimes, I've read the draft. I'm in agreement with Gori on what I see here. I like much more than what I read in the draft.
There's the same than in the draft, just less words, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was only one real negative in the draft, and that was the word that was recent used, and I don't like time variant things in drafts, so that we shouldn't talk, because recent only applies for a short period of time. So but the other one is, how do we handle the must situation that's in the draft of we must negotiate before use of the bits, which effectively means the bits are permanently have a default state where they're unused. So if you don't negotiate, there's no way to ever use the bit. So I think I would like to see language added that would allow the bit somehow to be used. It's a little teeny last code point that is available even after all the negotiations fail. There's a possibility to use it.
So what I was trying to say in the draft is, if you use a bit, you need to add some kind of negotiation mechanism to make sure that like whatever you define in your experiment can be changed. But like, there's no negotiation to use a bit, like, because like I don't know how that should work. Okay.
Yeah. So Brian Trevlin, it sounds like there's a little bit of wordsmithing to do here, because one of the things you might want to do is use these bits to negotiate the use of the bits, right? Like, because I mean, like, so any encoding is probably going to have a trick like that. Like, so we did with our, we actually did a little bit of an experiment where we just used all three of them because they're just sitting there and no one's ever going to use them. And we stuck the VAC and the spin bit on them because it was easier to get the spin bit to be implemented on TCP than it was on Quick, which is a different comment for a different room. But so tightening up the stuff about negotiation and making sure that it's clear that these are usable and, that it's not restricting how you can get them to the state where you can use them is good.
So, I mean, I think this is a really important point, because the point is, if you have proposed standard, you don't have to think about like negotiation anymore because you're sure this mechanism is like what we want and we never want to change it ever again, right? For an experiment, it's really important to be able to like change some things still.
So is negotiation presumed to work with options? And if so, aren't we just then yoking ourselves to the problems with options?
I'm not saying anything about this in the draft.
Or is there some other mechanism that I'm not seeing
So yes,
for negotiation?
like in accurate ECN, we actually use the bits for negotiation, and then we use the field with the 3 ECN bits in a different way, and that gives you an additional level of negotiation. So there are other options, yes.
I'm just particularly thinking about how non-sum did things historically, which is there was no explicit negotiation for use of that bit at the time. It was presumed to be available if ECN was negotiated. And then post-handshake, the endpoints would verify between themselves whether the functionality was actually there.
Can I clarify? The non-sum was set on the SYN, and but it was a declaration, and the receiver didn't have to do anything about it. I'm nearly absolutely sure about that because I looked into it. But
I'm actually quite sure that's not the case, Bob, because we use exactly the same bin to negotiate accurate ECN. We use that bit to negotiate accurate ECN. If that was used with nons, it wouldn't work.
You're right.
Yes. So I think Jonathan is right, but I'm not sure what the implications for this draft is. What is what is the lesson learned?
I'm basically saying that requiring an explicit negotiation during the handshake might be inconsistent with previous usage.
So as I said,
so we should discuss this further.
What the text is supposed to say is that if you want to use this bit, you need some way of negotiation in order to change the mechanism that is using the bit somehow. It doesn't say you have to use the bit for negotiation. It doesn't say like you have to use an option or whatever. It doesn't say how you do negotiation and when. But you have to have a way, because it's experimental, to change your experiment.
Okay, I think we can discuss the semantics offline.
And I think actually nons did not a good job about defining the experiment and trying to figure out what could fail and how to change it. But I also don't know how nons got assigned to this bit, because that doesn't seem to be what the procedures are saying, and I'm not old enough for that. Sorry. Maybe somebody remembers. I would really like to know.
Rod Grimes, I am in agreement with Jonathan here that I think we've discussed this enough. I think we've got some paths forward. We need to do a little bit of research and figure out maybe what some of these other things that might be possibilities are. But this is a really good start to move things forward.
Okay, perfect.
So thank you.
Right. I haven't stood up so far, and I'm surprised Michael hasn't either. But I just want to make sure that we're not thinking that because you put EXP at the top of a draft, it means it's more reversible. Yeah, it's the question of whether something is an experiment doesn't depend on what you put at the top of the draft. It depends on whether it's reversible. And so I think maybe the least we should do is write into this thing some statement like that to say the working group must be clear that the experimental status is not used just to get a code point in the TCP header. You have to prove that it's reversible.
It actually, the draft says it's not reversible if you use these bits. Then you use them, and if you deploy it, then they are in use. Then it's not reversible anymore. That's the problem about. That's why we had the standards action before. But what the draft does say is that because it's not reversible, you have to make sure you can still change your mechanisms you propose. So you need some negotiation for that.
Rod Grimes again. I think to address what Bob just said would be to add the language that there must be a deployment plan before the bits can be even negotiated. There has to be a deployment plan, which would include a de-deployment plan, by adding that as a requirement.
So I think the only
I think it's what you're actually saying there, and the care must be taken in experiment extension should discuss the scope of the experiment and the potential failure cases. What you're talking about is a deployment plan.
So, but like my point actually is I don't think there is a way to de-deploy. If you started deployment and you've been successful, even so like the mechanism you're proposing doesn't work in the way you want it to be, right? If you did deploy it, there's no way to undeploy it anymore.
But you can still use the bit because you have a negotiation.
No, because you negotiate what you do with the bit, not the use of the bit. There's no way to negotiate the use of the bit. So that's the whole point here, why it wasn't experimental before. Yeah.
Jana Iyengar, I don't know why there's so much confusion around this. I think this is fairly straightforward. I think we should adopt this. It seems sensible. Yeah, there's review later on to figure out if a bit that was previously assigned can be reversed or not.
So the assignment can be reversed if you have no deployment.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you have deployment, you cannot.
And to respond to the previous speaker's point, you can have a plan for deployment. A plan for deployment doesn't mean deployment.
Yeah.
I have planned for deploying many things. It doesn't mean that they are deployed. And so really the question at the point when you want to reverse something is to look and see, as we always do, if it's already been deployed. Yeah. If it's not deployed, go ahead and reverse it. If it's reasonable pain, go ahead and reverse it. If it's not reasonable pain, you can't reverse it. This is straightforward stuff.
That was what the draft was intended to say, and it should say it.
It does.
Okay.
Just to point out the nonce experience, we believe it was only ever deployed on one test bed, but it took us 19 years to establish that it wasn't deployed.
I didn't say that any of these experiments will be quick.
Jana Iyengar, I think that number differs depending on who you ask. Yeah. The same has been true of pretty much any technology, but that's not the point. That's why I think we sort of hand this off to the IESG to figure out what to do with that decision making.
I think it took us 19 years because 15 years nobody was interested in the bit.
David Black, plus one on what Mirya just said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's cut the down. Okay, Bob, you want to say something? Let's see.
I assume you got the sign.
Yeah, I uploaded. Let's see.
Do I have to try and stand there and yeah?
Yeah, so that's people can see from me take off.
Right.
Oh, why it's not? Maybe
Oh.
Sorry, I need to reload it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Accurate ECN, which is a proposed update to the TCP wire protocol. You can think of it a bit like when SAC updated TCP to get more accurate feedback about drop, and this is updating the TCP wire protocol to get more accurate information about ECN feedback. Right. So a couple of recap slides. The idea is to well, there's the ECN field in the IP header, and then three bits use 3 flags in the TCP header in order both to negotiate and then overload and use those, so much like we've just been talking about, to really solve a problem with the 3168 feedback that, as Jonathan calls it, it was sticky. You could only feedback one congestion experienced mark per round trip time. And the structure of Accurate ECN was that you have these 3 bits in the header, but once you're established, once your connection's established, you use those as a 3-bit counter, which is continually repeated to count the number of CE marks, which means that if you have ACK thinning or loss or whatever, that you'll still see when you do get a ACK through, you'll see where the counter's got to, but obviously being only 3 bits, it can only last up to 8 increments of the CE counter. And then you use that with the other fields, ACK number and sequence number, to work out how many bytes if you want to. And there was a supplementary accurate ECN option with variable length for a number of fields, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And that was added in so that you can have information about more fields, such as the ECT1 and ECT0, if you want to get feedback on them. And so we've had one suggestion that the current, sorry, these slides were drawn very quickly, so I may have to explain them more. I haven't done a good job of explaining them visually properly. The current design is the top one, and the proposed design is to have both of them, and for the initial value in the first field to determine which order the fields are in for the rest of the connection, right? And the initial values are chosen, so the first one is 1 in the least significant bit, and the alternative has a 1 in the most and the least significant bit, right? If you can't work your hex out, just so you have to check 1 bit. Yeah. Okay, and that's also been pointed out that if someone's monitoring the path, that means that your counter's effectively got halfway through the path when you halfway through the number space when you start, and so even if you miss the beginning of the connection, you can tell for quite a long time which order the fields are and things like that, right? Okay, so that was one thing we did. Or that's what we're proposing to do. We haven't put that in the draft yet. We've written the text and we're waiting to see what people say.
So, Bob, just to check, the accurate ECN option requires you to support the option, which is kind of a question whether you want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you support one option, you could support 2 options, and we could have an invariant format.
2 different kinds.
2 different, yeah. Two things that identify it very clearly from the beginning, rather than kind of embedded in the data, and then you can have a fixed format. Is that any more difficult to deploy the 2-kind version?
I proposed that, and Joe Touch said no, so I came up with this.
Sure, and that was a good thing to do, to propose something else to see if it was better or more ugly. I'm just wondering whether the first one has, as in using 2 kinds, is actually a simpler format and easier to see what's going on.
Right. And I suppose this has the advantage that it is for the case where someone's measuring and misses the beginning of the connection. This is clearer what's going on if you miss the beginning of the connection, or a packet gets lost and you don't see the first packet first, or they get reordered. This one still works, but the kind one will work all the time. Yeah.
Either Rod Grimes, either solution would work. I kind of like this in that it does give you that middle of the flow. If you miss the negotiation at the beginning, you do have a detection mechanism to know whether you're looking at EE0OB or ECEB while the flow is running. You can tell that, but if you don't capture that when you're trying to do monitoring data, you don't know what was negotiated in the beginning during the setup. So you don't know what those 2 value fields are. Do you agree with that, Bob?
Yeah,
that
but they will have, the kind will be different anyway if you use the 2 kinds. But this does mean that you save 1 kind out of the number space.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So shall we go ahead with this one? Or yeah.
I mean, I know there are endless ways to design this, right? But so what we do is we use the initial value to identify the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, so we could actually do this for all the fields, and then we could just order them in any order we want, always.
Explain why you want to do that.
Because at some point you might figure out you want to have the CE marking first.
Are you implying that you can do this more than once in a connection, or only at the beginning?
No, you can pick an initial value for each of the fields that identifies the field. And I mean, I
Well,
have
you-
to think. Yeah,
you
as I
on-
said,
only
you can
need-
design a lot of.
You only need to look at one field that has like a code point that tells you the order of all the fields. You don't need each field to tell you where it is, because they two
But-
could conflict then. One could say, I want to be at the front, and the other one says, no, I want to be at the front.
No,
You know.
one will be at the front, right? You just have to identify. There's only one at the front. You have to identify which one it is. And what I'm saying is you can use the initial value to identify which field you're looking at.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, just in the first field, then you don't have to look at any other fields. Otherwise, you have to look at all the fields, and and just in the first field, you can have more starting values in future in the first field to say what the order of the other fields are. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think Jonathan here. I think the point is there are 6 permutations of these 3 fields possible, and so we can have 6 different init values to identify each one.
There's more, because the idea of this. Sorry, I didn't give the introductory idea, which is that even already you don't have to have all the fields. You can have 2 of them if this one's never changed, or you can have one of them if both of the last 2 have never changed. And so, and what I'm wanting to be able to do is, with the initial values of that first field, you could say there are 4 fields. You could have a, or a 5th field or whatever. You can.
It's a pretty big number space. I'm sure you can handle that case in the future.
Yeah.
Janayanga, this is a solved problem. How big? I'm sorry, I haven't read the draft, and so I'm going to ask how big are each of these counter fields?
24 bits.
Okay, so if you're willing to put aside 3 bits even
from the
for what Maria was saying, I'm just going to be a little bit more specific, and we shouldn't design this here at the mic. It's a bad idea. But if you're going to, it's a lot easier if you identify each field on its own. You don't have to care about the ordering of the fields in here at all. It's very easy to do.
The difference with this design is actually that you don't set the bit aside, right? You just wrap
No, I
around
get
at some point, so the bit can actually be 0, even so you use this ordering. I'm not sure if that's a feature of our.
That's right. So I think what I'm suggesting is having a little bit more structure in the field itself, where you have 3 bits, say, to determine what field it is, and after that you have a counter within the field.
We thought about doing that, but if it's unnecessary. In other words, if you can do all the negotiation by just the initial value, then these can just be counters. Yeah.
I said we shouldn't design it at the mic, and I'm doing that.
Because this is kind
So
of
I'm gonna start.
preference discussions. It will be renderless.
Yeah.
So that's, if Jana, you have any proposal, send it to the mailing list.
So actually we used to have a different design at the very beginning, then we make it more simple and we changed it, now we're changing it back and we rub it around. But I think the important question here for the group is, do people want to support only one kind of option for this version, or do people want to support also the different ordering for this draft right now? Because you can always add this later, actually.
Okay.
So Neil brought this up about if you want to use something like FRS or whatever that actually uses the ETC1 field, then the second ordering would be much more beneficial for you.
ETC to ECT, but yeah. And it was SCA, not LFRS. But anyway, so the question I see is, do we want to allow reporting different combinations? In other words, so can you make a simple précis of the question? We can just ask the group whether this is a useful place to dig without how we encode it, but just, is it useful to actually look at that?
You asking me or?
Well,
Yoshi,
I don't mind whether the editors do this or whether the chairs do it, but I'm asking if we can ask the working group whether this is a useful place to dig.
Okay.
Consider yourselves asked.
Okay. Right. So what do we think?
Okay. Question is, so do we want to think about this kind of different 2 formats, basically? Is there any opinion?
Martin Duke, many clarification questions.
Okay.
So the point of this is to have a smaller option, but is it likely in the life of a connection that you will always have truncated options?
Yes.
Or
in the only two schemes that exist, you would you'd only either use ECT0 always or use ECT1 always. And at the moment, no one's proposing to use both always. Oh, that's not true. SCE wants to use both. So in some cases, you'd have two changing. And the way the draft works is that it says you can truncate it if the counter hasn't changed, but you must beacon, I think, 3 times per round trip time, all of them, just so it's clear that someone hasn't missed an ACK.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think it's, the option space is for some use cases pretty well constrained. So I think that would be valuable. And there's probably an encoding. I mean, again, we won't do it at the mic, but I'll probably do something to the list on how maybe we could generalize this in an efficient way. But yeah, I think this is, I think if we can get away with this usually being a 8-byte option instead of a 11-byte option, that would be good.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Rod Grimes, I'm just in support of let's have some discussion about doing this rather than not doing it.
But right now we are running out of time, and then this will be endless discussion, so I don't want that. So please, you can summarize this discussion and then send it to the mailing list, and then we can discuss, we can continuously discuss.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to heads up on go and have a look at the draft, because there's some reasonably extensive changes because due to a comment from Michael, which actually made us realize there was a lot bigger problem. When we made the option we've just been talking about optional, in other words, so that you could just work with the 3-bit counter without the option. We'd got all this stuff about if a counter has changed, you must send the option. But of course, if you weren't sending the option, you couldn't must send it. And so we had to put in some conditional stuff there. But then we realized we hadn't actually got any text for when you must send an ACK at all, even if you weren't sending the option. So we had to, there's quite a bit of text in there now about when you send an ACK, depending on what's changed, even if you're not sending options, as well as when you are, right? So please go and read that, because that's all new stuff. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, now I would like to talk about the procedural discussion for Packet ECN and ECN++. And then what I would like to discuss is how to proceed these drafts. So it's not a technical discussion. I would like to focus on how to proceed these 2 drafts. And then basically, that's why I don't want to need any detailed discussion to think about how to proceed this draft. So please not avoid any technical discussion in this discussion. And then first checkpoint, we have several technical discussions beforehand. And so my initial check is, do this draft have remaining technical discussion point before working group last call? Marcelo talk about some negotiation feedback things, and then also Bob talks about some TCP option format things. But I would like to check if this is very big showstopper of this draft, or do you have any opinion on that?
Mia Kulevin, I actually would like to debundle the discussion of accurate ECN and ECN++ here, because we cannot publish ECN++ without accurate ECN, but we can publish, or we can move on accurate ECN before we have full agreement on ECN++.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe accurate ECN is mostly ready. I mean, this negotiation is not like an issue in the sense that it's like something was wrong. It's something we actually had discussed before, and now we changed our mind, so we should address it. Yes, we still can. But other than that, it's ready.
Okay. And you want to proceed both drafts simultaneously? Okay, no.
Accurate ECN can go first.
Okay, okay.
Praveen, I have actually a question for Bob. So there was some discussion about DC-TCP style feedback for incremental deployment. So what was the outcome of that, and where are we?
Yeah, you're right. I'd forgotten to put that in those slides. We were considering writing a slight addition in a separate draft that gave another negotiation you could do with accurate ECN, which it says you can do in the draft. It says, you know, this is a way to extend it in future, and both or a number of companies have said we're using DC-TCP style feedback internally. If we move to using accurate ECN, we're going to have a transition problem, and so can we use the accurate ECN negotiation at the start, but still be using our old feedback scheme because we've got hardware that depends on it and all the rest of it. But at least then we can start using something different, and move to it as we get in new hardware and things. So that was the problem. And we've said, yes, we've got the facility to do that. You can use different initial values of the ACE counter in the 3-bit header to tell the other end and negotiate with the other end that I'm declaring I'm using a different sort of feedback on these bits. And SCE could do this instead of using the TCP option as well. So it's got that benefit. But you know, that would require the one disbenefit of this is there's only 8 numbers, you know, so it's a small number space already, right? And so what we were thinking is of setting up an IANA registry for those 8 numbers.
How many are you using?
Pardon? The draft uses, it uses 4 on the SYNAC, okay. but once you do the first data packet, you've got all 8. And we've only used 1.
Bob, I want to cut it.
Yeah.
Right now, you know, I do not want to focus technical discussion.
I know. Right. Okay. So I was asked that question. I've answered that question. I've forgotten the original question.
The question is there any technical discussion?
To stop working group last call.
No, because that would have been a separate draft anyway. Okay. Yeah. Because you can add that sort of thing later.
Okay.
So that answers my question, but I do think that draft is important because it probably like updates both DC-TCP as well as accurate ECN. So I do think that we should get it out there soon. Sure. Yeah, happy to help.
Yeah, Kulevan again. Yeah, so I really like to have this mechanism also in a separate draft because it shows how the negotiation scheme works, and that's really what we want.
Yeah. That will be part of procedural discussion. Okay, so I think, let's say, you know, we move forward to accurate ECN draft, and then both ECN++ draft, and then from chair's point of view, we still have several remaining points. And then first one is bit stem allocation, and then second one is I would like to check independency of the other related proposal. Basically, right now we have SC, but in future we might have another proposal. So, but what I would like to avoid is if we proceed accurate ECN and ECN++, we cannot do any other ECN experiment. I would like to avoid such kind of things. So before we proceed accurate ECN or ECN++, I would like to confirm there is no conflict or dependency for other proposals so that we can safely proceed accurate ECN or ECN++. That's what I would like to. Those 2 points I would like to confirm before we move on to the working group last call. Comment?
Right. SCE proposes to reuse bit 7 as a way of reflecting the ECT1 code point. Again, not some did more or less the same thing, although the details are different. I think the crucial point here is that this use of bit 7 would be used when ACK-ECN is not negotiated, and the ECE and CWR bits remain in the RFC 3168 meaning.
Yeah, I think that's to me, that's obvious. Okay, and then also, if you have any other thoughts, this is a two major point to, we need to think about. If you have other point we need to think about, please speak up. If not, we just focus on these 2 points to think about procedure accurate ECN and ECN++. Okay, so first I would like to discuss about bit 7 allocation. So now, we have several choices. One choice is promote accurate ECN to propose standard and allocate bit 7 for accurate ECN. This is one option. And then second option is the media propose about the registry flag thing, and then utilize this method and then apply bit 7 for accurate ECN. But there are several possibilities. So Michael Schaff mentioned that we only apply this policy only bit 7, or the other way is we can apply this policy all remaining reserved bit. And then the other way is I don't know this one exactly what does it mean, but in RFC 2780 there are way to temporary assignment of the TCP header bit, so we can we might be able to utilize that one, but I don't know if we haven't seen any precedence as far as I know. I don't know how it works. And so, but this is documented, so there could be a way for this. And then also, if there is other way to allocate bit 7, I would like to know here. So, any comments?
I think the SCE position would be to use the registry, subject to fine-tuning how the registry works.
So you mean you support media's proposal? Yeah.
Rod Grimes, the applying the policy to bit 7 only and applying the policy to all subsequent bits are supersets of each other. So there's no reason that we cannot apply to bit 7 at this time and then later escalate that to apply to all of them, so that we could conduct a little experiment here to find out how well this works for one bit without changing the status of the other 3 bits. And then later, if the experiment went well, we could expand the scope of it to say that it covers all reserved TCP header bits.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Michael?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, based on what I heard here in the room, is there might be another option, because we have repeatedly heard the term negotiation. And one thing you could think about is to move accurate ECN to propose standard for the negotiation part, because that seems to be useful even to other schemes. And then discuss separately what happens after negotiation, which could either be proposed standard or experimental. And as I heard that other guys are now thinking about using the negotiation for OPEC compatibility and things like this, I mean, it seems to me that this negotiation is pretty crucial, and it's a relatively trivial thing to do. So I think the bar for proposed standard for the negotiation would be relatively low. So that's, to me, at least putting the negotiation to propose standard would be an option that could possibly also be useful. But it's just a thought. I've been thinking about this before. So far, I wasn't really convinced that it's a good option. But based on what I heard now in the room is, I think it's something to discuss at least as another venue. And the good thing would be in that case, the bit would be assigned by the normal way. It would be just a proposed standard to allocate the bit.
Replying to that one directly, I'm actually not sure how that would work, because if you negotiate something, you need the default behavior. You need at least define one behavior, right? Otherwise, you negotiate like void, basically. I don't know. I'm not sure how this can work in practice.
Well, I mean, you established the other registry that you mentioned and a couple of the other things. So that is all part of the negotiation. And then what you do afterwards is, I mean, there can be different specs for what happens afterwards, as you discussed. I mean, this fallback mode for the existing thing could be another experimental or whatever spec for the backward compatibility. So I don't know how exactly the document would look like. I just want to note it's an option. And it would have the benefit that the bit is allocated by a proposed standard. That's relatively simple because it focuses only on the three-way handshake.
So the problem is you negotiate something and then you have an extension that negotiates something else. So if the extension is not understood, you have to fall back to the thing that you negotiated first, right? And if the first thing you negotiate doesn't actually imply any mechanism, then you have to have a default mechanism with the negotiation. Otherwise, I don't understand how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, but I think even in the negotiation, you can mandate guidelines on what to do afterwards, because it would be proposed standard possibly. So you can mandate what has to happen after that. So you can have requirements on the schemes after that. I mean, I don't know how it exactly works, and I don't want to engineer it right now. I just mentioned that to me, there's another option, and it means putting at least parts of accurate ECN into proposed standard. I would also, finally, to conclude, I would also think, I mean, if we get implementations, I mean, even putting accurate ECN as a whole to proposed standard to me could be an option.
This is Bob Briscoe. The idea of splitting the negotiation from the scheme it negotiates assumes you use the word after a lot in that, but you've got the possibility of reordering. You've got TFO to deal with potentially, which starts sending data during the handshake. So these things are intimately tied together. And you've got the possibility of losing the third ACK in the handshake, and you've got to deal with all those things. And if you try and split that into two completely separate mechanisms, it's nearly impossible. You really need to do all that in one mechanism and have, like Mia said, a default, and then anyone who wants to start with something different can build on that, rather than try and have a clean in an ideal world, yes, you'd have a clean separation, but we're way beyond that because we've got so few bits. It's
okay.
Yeah, but if that's true what you said, I mean, you're just telling me right now that what has been discussed earlier is not possible. That is to use the negotiation for something else, and I don't understand that.
So you need negotiation to extend the scheme, but you need always a base scheme because that's what you negotiate for.
Then I'll be fine. Then let's have the base scheme as accurate ECN and do that on SPS. I mean, that would be an easy solution to me.
It's one option.
This is my point as individual contributor to be, just to be clear.
So just because actually I think even if we do accurate ECN at proposed standard, we should change the registration registry, registration policy, but this is then independent from each other at that point.
It's an independent, and I mean, just to be clear, I disagree that we need to change the registration registry if we find another way for accurate ECN. If we don't find a way for accurate ECN on proposed standard, then of course we have to do something. But I would strongly suggest the working group to think about the first way, because this would actually not require any changes in the registry right now.
Okay, so I start thinking this is kind of preference argument, and then or if we discuss a little bit more, can we convert some opinion, or just this is people start thinking this is basically the question which method people prefer. And
so what I heard from my earlier discussion was that I think people would like to change registration policy no matter what.
Mhm.
So I will work on the draft and propose it again.
Okay.
But maybe we can, independent of that, we can maybe take a hum if people think they would like to go for proposed standard or experimental for accurate ECN. Like I personally, I actually really don't care. I just want to move it ahead.
Okay. Okay, I can get a data point. So if people think accurate ECN should be published as proposed standard, please raise your hand. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you think accurate ECN is published as an experimental RFC, please raise your hand. Media, why you would raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, 13 actually. And then, but if we accept, we try to publish accurate ECN as proposed standard, you have to restructure the draft because right now the draft is very well written as an experimental draft, in my understanding. Because it's discuss how to do experiment, what's the goal of the experiment, something like that, right? You have to modify the draft drastically, I think.
Just take those sections out.
Okay.
A comment on Jabber from Chris Lemons again. A point of order, is this sort of thing that hum would work better for instead of a counted vote?
Yeah, it's okay.
I would say we don't really have rough consents there. It's like a little bit half-half with a slight tendency for experimental. The draft is written as experimental. All the text is in for experimental. Let's just go for experimental.
Okay. But
Corey, I think the decision on this is actually the chairs with their AD. So I don't mind how you get the consensus opinion, but you could ask who raised their hand twice because they really just think we should publish something. So you understand the momentum. If you wish to, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. But I think still we need to discuss a little. But media, please update your draft and then submit some proposal a little bit more about your flag registration if you need.
Sorry, Joshi. I mean, just to more to the point than of what Corey just said. I mean, this doesn't seem to be the case as like half and half people thinking that should be one thing or should be the other thing. It seems that a lot of people think it should be published and it doesn't matter how.
Okay.
Right. So I think that's the situation. I mean, I think the decision is pretty much irrelevant here. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to. I mean, the feedback of the room for me is this should go ahead. It doesn't matter experimental or PS. Just go ahead.
So maybe a way forward, a suggested way forward would be to ask the room if people care strongly if it's published one way or the other. Alternatively, you can say, can you live with either one of these?
So actually, okay, it's another implication, right? So if we want to go for experimental and we want to allocate the bid, we have to publish the registration change at the same time. So if people think we should publish its experimental, then this is also an agreement of this group to move quickly ahead with the registration policy change.
Right.
Okay. Which I think is a good thing. Yeah.
Right. So at least I would like to see how many people support the media's flag registry draft. And then, so if you support media's flag registry draft, please raise your hand. Okay, it's a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. And then how many people who doesn't support media's flag registry draft, please raise your hand. Okay, seems to be strong idea. Got it. Okay. Hold back. Because this is TCPM's way of doing, but yeah, we can do that.
I mean, only if it's very
Yeah. Okay, so next things I would like to check independence of the other related proposal. So we have some exchange email with Miria, and then but I would like to confirm accurate ECN and SCN will not conflict each other because of negotiation scheme.
I'm sorry. I would like if I can just go back to the previous discussion briefly. So,
okay,
in terms of the shortest path to publishing accurate ECN, I heard two different roadblocks. If we make it a proposed standard, then we have to do some editorial rewrite of the draft. If we choose to make it experimental, we must get Mira's draft all the way through to go to last call simultaneously.
That's right.
And I heard a little bit of quibbling about the details in Mira's draft. So I think we should probably, I have no idea how big the rewrite is and how big the delta is on what people want to see out of Mira's draft, but I think we should spend maybe a little time seeing what the shortest path is, since nobody seems to care on the substance of which classification it is.
But it seems to me it's author's decision, author's preference from my point of view.
Jana,
because people don't care.
I think the amount of effort is roughly equivalent. I suspect that it can go to PS if you simply delete those sections that talk about it being experimental. And Miria's draft is basically a paragraph long, and that can also get done quite rapidly and go out there as well. So,
do you mind?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that is assuming that everyone in this room are the only people that might object. But of course, there's a mailing list. And so people may not want to do Mia's draft, and then we're in, it's, yeah.
Rod Grimes, would there be any reason that we couldn't proceed forward with both and then make this decision later?
Gori first, I still assert it's the chair's decision about what to do.
Yeah.
But I'd like to provide an information point. I mean, this Mira's draft, whatever, the accurate ECN draft is only changing one thing. People are trying to implement, this is probably good for PS. If you feel it's mature enough, it's good for PS. The registry thing, yeah, sure. But if we do this, probably becomes sticky and immediately becomes equivalent to PS because the sticky allocation happens. So I think the registry thing is something we should definitely progress as quickly as we can. But I wouldn't gate the other one on that because it's a wider consensus call. That's my input.
Are you saying
Okay.
you want to prefer proposed standard now?
I was saying that there could be a good argument for proposed standard because people are starting to implement against this. Therefore, it will be seen in the internet, and therefore it will be effectively a sticky bit in the update draft, the other draft, and therefore it doesn't really matter what path we take through this. If your draft, calling it your draft, matures quickly, that can go quickly, and if there is not consensus on that discussion, then this shouldn't block it, right? So let's make this PS is what I'm motivating. Yeah, I get that.
Michael, go.
Jana Iyengar.
Stop.
Oh, sorry.
Michael.
Yeah, I'd just like to note, I mean, the key advantage of going via PS is that we have no dependency on IETF consensus and changing the registry. So because even if this working group decides to publish the registry change fast, it still needs to get IETF consensus. And that's a question of its own. The benefit of doing PS is you can just use the usual IETF procedures and we are done, at least in the working group. So that, to me, it would be, there could be a chance that the PS is actually faster outside the TCPM working group. But it's up to the working group to decide what they want.
Jana Iyengar, I actually was going to say exactly that. I was going to say that there is one path that is faster, and that's PS. So experimental, because it brings in this dependency, can be the same speed or can be slower. It's not going to be faster. So this is definitely going to be faster. And with that, it might be worth sort of getting a sense of the room again, of whether we want to do PS.
So my question is, if we PS, then we can allocate bit 7 for accurate ECN. And what about other ECN experiment? Do we want to terminate other experiment? We disallow to do other ECN experiment. That's our conclusion.
Well, this is the thing. There may be other uses for bit 7 which do not conflict with ACCN because they only come into effect when ACCN negotiation fails.
Mm-hmm. That means we should change the name of the bit, I think, at least. Accurate, if you are using accurate ECN bit, it's something strange to me.
Jana Iyengar,
Yeah.
I don't think that question is relevant to whether this is PS or experimental. That's a deployment question, right? So whether it's PS or experimental doesn't change the fact that the bit on the wire is going to conflict if you use it in 2 different ways. So I think going to PS makes sense independent of that question. I wouldn't bring those 2 questions together.
What?
I'm not ready to bring the questions.
Okay, in this actually,
Yeah.
in this good spirit of like moving on quickly, I have 2 requests. One, can we do a hum for experimental or proposed standard? And 2, can we do a hum for adopting the registration policy change?
Sorry, what's the purpose of the hum? Because we already had the hum, right?
Because we had a discussion now, and I think people changed their mind.
Okay.
Just to try and make the hums clear, if we do the hums, can we do a hum where you don't care, so we don't vote twice?
Okay.
No, for this. What are you saying? We vote? Are people allowed to vote twice or once? People, which? Don't care separately, I think, is a useful point, and you can reevaluate it how you like. Would like to proceed, but don't care. No, it's their call.
Okay, one more time. It's okay. Okay. Let's see. If you want to publish accreditation as a proposed standard, please raise your hand. If you don't care, we will check later. So if you don't care, don't raise your hand. So if you don't, I will count the number don't care as well. So that if you really think PS is fine, please raise your hand. Yeah, it should be PS. Definitely should. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't cheat. If you think accreditation should be experimental, please raise your hand. If you think I don't care, but I want to publish it, please raise your hand.
No, don't do that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I got data point. So we are running out of time. So I think this is very controversial stuff. So I think let's give chairs some time to think about it. Okay.
Rod Grimes, are we talking about anything in the bottom half of this slide at some point?
Yeah, right now I'm trying to do. Sorry. Jana, I would like to cut a question if possible. Make it short.
Okay. I honestly, I don't think it's controversial. I think that people here who don't care still want to see it published, which to me counts as a vote towards going with the shortest path. So if there are more people going for PS, and there are a lot of people who say PS or experimental don't care, I would count them towards either neither or towards PS at this point.
But let's discuss among chairs, and then we will try to think about what's the best next step. Probably I will ask several steps, several possibility, and then try to people choose the path. That's what I'm thinking right now. Okay, make it quick.
Didn't people just like kind of choose the path? I mean, like you have to confirm on the mailing list, yes, but I think it was pretty clear what was said in the room. Yeah.
Chris.
So like of course the chairs should sit together and make sure that they all agree that there is consensus in the room. But like my sense of the room is there is consensus in the room.
But how? It's not very clear to me. How do it? No. So how do we allocate B7? That's not very clear to me. Yeah. That's what we'd like to confirm on the mailing list as well.
We have to confirm it on the mailing list, but if we go for proposed standards, then it's very clear how we allocate the bit, right? In the draft or in the RC.
Yeah, but at the same time, we see strong support for the adopting the supporting the draft. So what's the meaning of it?
There are 2 more bits. Yeah, there are 2 more bits.
Michael, make it quick, please.
Yeah, in general, I think first of all, a consensus in TCPM is always figured out on the mailing list because we have, for example, people that don't attend the meetings. So anyway, we need to confirm this on the mailing list. At least with my chair hat on, I also see here quite some momentum on the proposed standard way to do it. So that's probably what I would take out of this discussion. And then this means that we can separate out the discussion for the registry draft. Also we have to discuss this separately, in my opinion. And given that this was a very late submission, I also think we have time to figure this out, for example, the next meeting.
I would like to disagree a little bit here because it's not decided yet if you go for proposed standard or experimental, right? So it's both an option. If we go for experimental, we should move very quickly ahead with the registration change. And given that there's like large agreement in the room already, and we want to move quickly anyway, it would be nice to at least kind of make a hum about adoption in the room now, which anyway has to be confirmed on the mailing list because we're all
With chair hat on. Also this draft was submitted after the deadline. The presentation slides were submitted very late. So by usual TCPM means we don't do an adoption call in that situation. And to me, this would not be a good idea. And as I said, for what I think I hear right now, is we don't even need it. We can have the adoption discussion, in my opinion, on the mailing list later.
Right.
When people had time to think about the different variants.
Right.
And this is chair hat on.
Yeah, I'm accepting the chair's decision, but this is also not a usual situation because usually when you propose something, there's not this dependency, right? There's a dependency here in the spirit of moving quickly. And I submitted it very late, but only because I was discussing this with the chairs in the background and like confirming that this is what we want to do. But like, it's a chair's decision, definitely.
Yeah.
Just a data point. I've just checked through the draft for what the changes would have to be to make it not experimental. The accurate ECN draft, I mean, and the only things are where it talks about other experiments, you just have to say experiments, because it's not an experiment. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Move on to the next topic. So I'd like to check independency from the proposal, as I mentioned. So if people think there's no conflict with accurate ECN and SCE. And if you have some concerns, please say your opinion. If you say,
Rod Grimes, there is ongoing discussions in that area, and I don't believe we are at a conclusion on exactly what the compatibility situation is between ACC-ECN and SCE, and between L4S and SCE independence. And we would like more time to continue that discussion before we talk very much about it here.
Okay, got it.
Corey Fairhurst, very quickly. I think the first thing on the marking of ECT1 and reporting of it, we had a discussion here. We thought that was something that Accurate ECN should consider. I think looking in the room here, we should consider whether reporting ECT1 behavior is also possible in Accurate ECN. On the second one, TSVWG did not make a call on that situation. It does intend to look at potential conflicts. Currently, there is nothing to report. We cannot report anything on that second bullet from TSVWG.
Okay.
May I come in again? So I'm pretty sure that we can confirm right now that there's no conflict, because either you don't use it in the handshake, the proposal you have right now doesn't conflict, right? Or you use accurate ECN to negotiate whatever you want as a feedback scheme. Or if you really want like a header bit, then you have to use one of the other two bits, because we have two more bits. But like, I see this as independent because that's what we want to use the bit for now. And that's what we have to decide on.
Rod Grimes, if we change accurate ECN to a proposed standard, if that negotiation fails, if the handshake fails, as long as the bit that's allocated to accurate ECN then becomes available for another use, then we don't have a conflict. There's a qualifying thing there. That bit has to become available after the handshake has failed. So it gives a default state to the use of the bit, and that needs to be addressed.
So this is also true for the ECE bit and the CWR bit. Yes. Like if you don't negotiate it, they are not used. That's just the way it is.
Okay, but probably you have to clarify in the draft. You have to clarify in the draft.
No, because it's the same for ECE and CWR, and it's not clarified in that draft, because all we say in the draft is, if you set the bit in the handshake, then afterwards it has this meaning. It doesn't say what happens to the bits if the negotiation fails. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Whatever you say will be wrong. Yeah. Whatever Miriam will say will be wrong. Be careful what you're referring to.
Okay. So so my take is still need to discuss a little bit more. Sorry. We are running out of time. And I'm very sorry that we have 4 individual presentation. Yeah. So let's move on to the presentation. But I'm very sorry, but just please make really quick. I'm sorry.
Praveen, going to talk about HiStart++. This is mostly a recap of the talk I did the last IETF. So for details, you can refer to that talk. The only new information I have here is some experimental results from the lab measurements. So it's the one above, yeah. You can scroll down. So the gist of this is that we use delay increase method of the HiStart paper to exit slow start, and then we enter limited slow start. The reason we do that is because HiStart may exit slow start prematurely, and that may cause performance problems. Can you go one slide up?
You can actually use this.
So some results here. So for large RTT flows, we actually see a pretty significant improvement with a simulation of WAN. So up to 39% on average and P90 as well for short flows, and 14% for long flows. We don't see too much difference for short flows, small RTT flows, anything less than 100 millisecond. But we see something that is very consistent across all the tests is that even if good put doesn't improve, the number of retransmissions decrease a lot, which means we're putting less load on the network. We're not CPU limited here, so the number of bytes on the network is reduced, and RTOs are reduced as well, and there is some improvement to loss recovery because fewer packets are lost. We are awaiting results from A/B test. I couldn't get that completed in time for this TCPM meeting, but preliminary number shows again reduction in retransmissions. We are going to get you numbers on the mailing list from 2 different online services shortly. So currently this is deployed on by default in both Windows 10 as well as the server side. We have a draft posted, so if you haven't read it, please review it and provide feedback. It's a really short draft. And my request to the group is to adopt the document.
So how many people read this draft? Please raise your hand. Just one. Okay. How many people think this draft can be adopted as informational RFC? This is informational,
yes.
Mia, I have a quick question, like, because I read your slides, right, and it said BBR startup phase and a paste stripping. This is something you want to still add to the draft?
No, so this draft stands on its own. It's just future experiments we'd like to do.
Okay.
If we get results on that, that would be a separate presentation, maybe in ICCRG.
Hi, Jana Engar. Are these results, do you generally believe they'll apply to Quick as well?
They should. So I think they will apply pretty much to any slow start, any transport that's doing slow start.
So then that's a question for maybe the chairs and the ADs. Is this sort of document belong here or in ICCRG?
Because intended status information, this is describe what Microsoft does, then I think information should be fine as TCPM working group item from my point of view.
No, it should be fine. But my question is, if so, let me put it differently. Are you considering expanding the scope of the document to include Quick as well, or are you planning to limit it to TCP?
Currently not. Currently is describing what's done in TCP, but it does apply to Quick. So that might be a separate draft, or it might be an extension to the Quick RFC to suggest that high start may be a way to do slow start. So both those are options.
Sure.
It's your preference. It's your call. I think it's totally fine to adapt this draft as information at TCPM. If you want to modify and then do something, then you can go to ICCRG if you want.
I think for now, we would like to just document this for TCP because it's currently already deployed. So, next steps? What would be the next steps?
Data point is not good enough. Maybe we can continue discussing. You can, if you have something, you can update the draft.
Right.
Or you can you can stimulate discussion on the email leaks to get more support.
Yeah, my request would be for people to read this and give us feedback, because I think this is quite important for us to publish.
Yeah, I will commit to reviewing this. Thank you. And also, I just wanted to point out, I did a little survey of the main implementations and how they were being used, and with High Start, before High Start plus, and everyone was turning it off. So if you're willing to turn it on, then it says something. Yeah.
So Linux, I believe, has it on. I think they are also deploying the delay increase algorithm, but I believe they don't have the limited slow start improvement.
Yeah. Linux has it on by default, but I mean the people who actually operationally use it turn it off. High Start, not High Start plus.
No, I don't think so. That's not true. Yeah.
No.
Not
well,
all of it.
That's what I was. Okay.
So they typically turn off the what's that?
Interpacket arrival algorithm.
Yeah, the interpacket arrival bit, not the whole algorithm.
This draft actually specifically states you have to do the delay increase, not the interpacket arrival.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen. If you want, we can have a young presentation. No? Akbar, if you can make it 1 minute, that's fine. I'm very sorry for that.
Okay, hello everyone. So let's jump quickly. In this document, we want to be able to suppress delayed acts in some cases where it underperforms. So basically, we want to do that through using one of the reserved bits in the TCP header. And well, these are the updates in the last revision of the document, basically taking into account feedback from the room in Montreal. And well, in the annex of the document, we have tried to summarize some alternative approaches that might be useful to do what we want to do to some extent. And well, here are some of them. ACCC would, where the sender tells the receiver the AG ratio to be used. And this entails, however, some overhead due to the options that are supported there. Also, tail loss probe was suggested. However, this entails sending additional probe segments, so perhaps it adds some overhead we might prefer to avoid. There are also workarounds, such as sending an old byte. However, this is perhaps not so clean. And also, it may entail sending a whole new packet if there's no new data available for transmission, or something like the split hack supported in the Contiki OS, which is based on splitting a message into 2 segments. There was a lot of great feedback by Bob Briscoe on the mailing list, so thank you very much for that. There are additional motivating scenarios for why one may want to suppress delete acts. So one reason is getting up to speed fast without inducing much queue during slow start. That had been actually supported for a while in an old version of the Accurate TCN draft. And also there have been discussions in the context of Quick for a more general support of communicating the ACK ratio. And there are other, other use cases for getting triggering quick acts. So, there have been other comments, such as considerations on middle box traversal of bits 4 to 6, perhaps not so good. And Bob also suggested using the urgent pointer in an innovative way, such as reserving 3 bits of that to define an ACK ratio exponent that might be used for several communicating several ACK ratios, such as the one which would suppress delete acts, but also perhaps other ACK ratios. And this would be interesting because it adds no overhead. Perhaps there's the problem of what happens when the urgent flag is actually set. That's basically a quick presentation. So I don't know if there are comments, questions.
The one question I have is, how does this differ from the push flag?
Well, there was some discussion previous to Montreal, and it seemed like setting the push flag doesn't mean you get an immediate ACK. There was some discussion on the mailing list, several use cases described, and it seemed that someone brought this point, but the response from the working group was more than actually you cannot assume that the push flag means suppressing delete acts.
Right, this looks potentially useful. I think I'll need to read it in more detail.
Thank you so much.
Any more comments? Okay. Yeah, thanks for lots of discussion. Okay, see you in Vancouver. Thank you. Sorry.
Maybe I'll get more
Somehow we've maneuvered ourselves into a world where it's easier to publish to a standard than an experiment.
No, that's just a very particular moment in time that we are at.
No.
On this.
Well, I mean, that's or the weird thing about the registry is that like it just added stuff to bureaucracy for the experiments that I guess doesn't exist for
You
kiosks.
were right to bring it back, and I think this should have.